All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our next video. We are going to be looking at epidemiology this time around. So looking at epidemiology and a little bit of pathology as well, but mostly epidemiology and what that means. So talking about epidemiology is the study of disease, basically disease processes. So what happens here? Of course, we have to have some sort of an infection or some sort of a disease actually grab a hold. So in the terms of environmental epidemiology, what we're looking at is microbes and pathogens. So we have to come into contact with something that is going to cause a disease. And this is going to be a microbe that invades a host defense, penetrates sterile tissue, and multiplies. And this is going to be resulting in infection. Infection, for it to be a disease or for it to be a malformation, is going to have to cause disruption and damage. So it has to be some sort of an issue, so to speak, for the microbe to be classified under an infectious disease. So some normal sites that harbor normal resident microbes are going to be in things like the GI tract, the upper respiratory tract, external genitalia, the vaginal canal. These are areas where we have microbe populations that are normal. We usually have some sort of bacteria that exist here. Places where this should not be happening, right? Areas of the body where there are no microbes, there are no bacteria, there are no anything that doesn't exist inside of your body. So places like the heart, the liver, the lungs, the kidneys, the brain, musculature, fluids, okay, blood, urine in the kidneys and bladder, CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, bones, ovaries, gonads, sinuses, middle and inner ear, and the internal eye. These are all areas that are microbe free. They are sterile. So defining epidemiology, this is going to be concerning the geographical distribution and timing of infections. Pretty much studying disease, studying infectious disease, and the occurrence which it is happening in. All right, so looking at how transmitted diseases are maintained in nature and recognizing outbreaks. Epidemiology is sort of an umbrella that's going to include etiology, and etiology is the study of the cause of disease. So causative agents and disease transmission. We have to analyze a population here. So looking at epidemiological analysis of a geographical area, we're looking at a portion of individuals in the area that are susceptible. Susceptible individuals have to be defined by a specific character trait or a specific genetic code or heritability or some sort of a factor, right? Susceptible individuals, let's say, for instance, of intravenous drug use, okay? If a population is undergoing IV drug use, it could make them more susceptible to bloodborne infections and diseases, especially if they're sharing needles and things like that. So, and a behavior such as this is going to predispose a certain person to being more susceptible to a certain disease or process. Being able to define the population is going to be very important because then we can measure how much of an interest that we need to take in that population for a specific disease. Talk about morbidity and mortality together in terms of disease outcomes. Morbidity is going to be the state of being diseased. Okay, so if we say that there's a morbidity of 82%, that means that 82% of a population has a disease or has a positive diagnosis for a disease, right? Morbidity, or the total morbidity, is expressed in number of individuals. Morbidity rate is going to be expressed as a number of disease individuals out of a standard number. So usually the standard number is around 100,000. This is going to be indicative of the population as a whole or a larger population. We have two aspects that are relevant to an epidemiologist. The terms are prevalence and incidence. All right? Prevalence is how common it is, okay? The number or the proportion of individuals within a particular illness in a given population at a point in time. So how popular that particular disease is, for lack of a better term. For example, if we look at this estimate in 2012 by the CDC, about 1.2 million people 13 years and older had an active HIV infection. As a proportion or a rate, this means that the prevalence It's going to be about 467 persons per 100,000 of the US population. The incidence is going to be the number or proportion of new cases in a period of time. So if the prevalence is going to be 467 out of 100,000, the incidence is going to take it down to what happened in the specific year. So for example, the same year, the CDC estimates that there were 43,000 new diagnoses of HIV infection. That means that there is an incidence of 13.7 new cases per 100,000 population. So the prevalence is going to be 467 out of 100,000. The incidence over that period calendar year is 13.7 out of 100,000. Here's a relationship to incidence versus prevalence. Usually if a disease is stable or constant or not really posing a massive issue, the incidence rate should stay relatively linear, all right, should stay relatively low because we're getting a set amount that's happening every year, all right? The prevalence, however, is going to continue to rise as long as there are new infections. So for a chronic disease like HIV, the prevalence is generally going to be higher over time because it's representative of the total number of cases that happen over many years of that disease prevalence. Whereas the incidence is so it's simply happening over the previous year and then it restarts at the beginning of the next year. So some patterns in incidence. Morbidity rate is going to be the incidence and prevalence of mortality, right? Mortality rate is going to be a percentage of the population that has died. So morbidity is a percentage that is diseased. Mortality is a population percentage that has died from that disease. We see that examples of sporadic diseases that we see occasionally are going to be without a geographic concentration. So this is going to be something like plague or rabies or tetanus. There's various outcomes or blotchy epidemics that happen over the course of time that don't have a specific constrained area. Let's see. All right, looking at endemics and epidemics, diseases are going to be constantly present unless they have been eradicated by some sort of vaccination or something that has pretty much diminished them down to zero in a select population. So diseases are usually constant at a low level in a population for a geographic region. And if that is the case, they are known as endemic. For example, here, malaria is endemic to some regions of Brazil, but it is not endemic to the United States because we do not have a prevalence of it. Diseases that have larger than expected numbers of cases in a short period of time are going to rise to epidemic standards. Influenza, this is a good example of an epidemic disease because usually during the winter time, the incidence patterns of influenza go up, right? The seasonal increases are expected, so it's not typically viewed as an epidemic every winter. However, sometimes it is far greater than what the expected number is. And if that is the case, then we will enter into an epidemic standard. All right, so this is an example of that where we see influenza and influenza-like illness. There's a national baseline here, and this is over the winter months we can see in the middle. All right, you see that there's a general uptick of about 2.5% of the population that has this particular flu or influenza-like illness. However, see that during the 2007-2008 year timeframe, during this winter period, there was a large uptick to almost 6% of the population seeing it at any one time. And that would be viewed as an epidemic at that particular time because it has risen so much higher than what it was expected to be at the time. So we had a view of a seasonal epidemic here of influenza-like illness. Here's looking at morbidity and mortality, right? The epidemic threshold here for influenza and pneumonia is going to be around this region, okay? This is fluctuating or oscillating per season. So we see that the actual mortality is usually going to be very close, right, to the seasonal baseline. there are going to be the occasional uptick as far as actual mortality is concerned. For example, here we use the 2007, 2008 timeframe again. We see a large increase in mortality well above the epidemic threshold. Okay, so that was a small tutorial on epidemiology and looking at epidemics and endemics. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate it. Like and subscribe to the channel. Also, patreon.com/twistedscience for more. And I will talk to you all later. Peace out.